This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC and JZ Microphones. So get ready to rock.
You're going to remember what I told you. Like, getting smart gets you paid. Being stupid gets you killed. You know, like, got to learn the difference between what people need to see of you and who you need to be. You can't be this person in your head forever, but you can take that intellect, you can learn things, you can educate yourself, and you can grow beyond this into something else as you get older.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. This episode is sponsored by OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, your trusted source for memory and speed upgrades, DIY installs, and used Macs for your studio. Let OWC focus on keeping your studio Mac in killer condition so that you can focus on making great music. Why ditch your existing Mac when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and learn how you can supercharge your studio Mac, the speed to create, the capacity to dream. Now find out how awesome your studio can be at OWC. This episode is sponsored by JZ Microphones with a unique golden drop capsule design. The Vintage Series V67 and V11 microphones offer Class A discrete amplifier circuitry, extremely low self-noise, and advanced built-in shock mount technology to bring a rich, warm sound to your studio with crisp clarity and detail that will make you wish that you had discovered these mics a whole lot sooner. Go to jzmic.com or click the link in the show notes below and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR right now to get 50% off their Vintage Series microphones. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Langston Masingale, who started working in recording studios 25 years ago at age 16 in his uncle's studio in New Jersey. He went on to help start JJ Audio Mics in 2009, and in 2014, he struck out on his own and invented what would become the core technology of his tape emulation product, Zulu. He also formed Handsome Audio in 2015 with his partner Tod Levine, and they released Zulu in the same year. Langston also owns a recording studio, Narrative Audio, in Syracuse, New York, where he produces and records artists, and he loves to create new and interesting tools for the modern recording engineer and producer. His early exposure to analog tape has guided and shaped his sonic perspective in a world of digital audio. Also, I want to give a big thank you to Alan Evans for introducing us. And Rockstars, make sure to check out Matt Boudreau's new book from Working Class Audio, Journal Volume 1, where you can read his interview with Langston there as well. I think that came out a little while before this episode, but you should check that out, and I'll leave a link to Amazon so you can go check that out as well. Today on the podcast, I'm super excited to learn more about analog tape and how we can recreate that sound when recording and mixing in our DAWs. So please welcome Langston Masingale to Recording Studio Rockstars. Langston, are you ready to rock, dude?
Absolutely. Let's rock.
Yeah, welcome to the show, man. Really glad to have you here. And, I've, of course, been hearing about you through Alan and through Matt, and so it's cool to be meeting you in person.
Oh, dude, the pleasure's absolutely all mine. I actually sat and listened to a bunch of your different interviews besides just Alan's, just because I wanted to get to know more about, your particular brand of interviews and what you particularly ask people, just because I like to know what I'm getting myself into. But also just because I like journalism as a pursuit. At one point in time, I myself wanted to be a journalist, more of a print journalist than an on-the-air one.
Nice.
But, so that's my thing. Like when I learn about someone's show, I like to dig into their format, and as you'll learn, I'm actually working on getting into this too as a side thing.
Getting into podcasting as well?
Yeah.
Cool,
but
man. Cool.
Not full time, kind of like quarterly. That would be the dream.
Podcasting is a lot of fun. I feel I feel honored that you would call it journalism. I guess it is. I just think of it as this new, fun, easy to access storytelling format that just allows me to meet all these amazing people like yourself all over the world.
Well, the trick to it is, for me, is that you guys are kind of like the Peter Parker, right, of terrestrial radio, except now you've gone internet, aka pirate. And what I think podcasting presents to the public that a lot of radio doesn't now is the intimacy that radio used to offer, in terms of before talk show formats became like the de facto only way you could actually get entertainment news. There used to be more of, hey, we're here live at, CBGB's with this band, y'all. And we're going to, used to get more of that. And so podcasts kind of give the off-kilter segment of society a voice and also an outlet so that we can get updates directly from the source now, right? Like, in a way, because radio has, in effect, shrunk and atrophied into a former version of itself, especially on the terrestrial side, right? We don't really have that kind of insight to gain an intimate familiarity with musicians, artists, political figures, educators, scholars, scientists. That has kind of gone away. So with podcasters, you guys actually have a very special role in giving people a new lens and a new window back into that world, right? Because without it, we just have talk shows that are masquerading as the news now, right?
Yeah,
and masquerading as opinion pieces and editorial news. And that's desperately needed in a modern society. So I think what you do is actually very honorable. And I have a lot of respect for people that do it. I think there's a great need for it. A lot of voices need to be heard in that ongoing conversation. You'll hear me speak about that a lot. But I really dig it. I think that this is a great way to get back out there.
Well, right on. I appreciate that. And, one of the things that I used to really enjoy was flipping on college radio stations where you just had this really, really relaxed sort of, amateur meets passionate dialogue going on with the DJs and stuff. And that disappeared, I think, and comes back again with podcasts. So that's one of the things I like about it a lot.
Totally dig it. I used to be a college DJ for like a half of a year, and it was a Jesuit school, so the amount of stuff we could play was really limited, but I used to get the good 1 a.m. spot and play a lot of local bands on there, and they would actually stay up late and listen to this really limited range college radio station in the immediate area, because it was just cool back then to hear yourself on the radio or hear upcoming new music, especially local flavors. You know what I'm saying? So it was great to be able to do that and to be like, again, that person in the community that folks could go to and be like, hey man, play my cassette. Oh my God, am I dating myself? On the air, and you could do it. There was power in that. And again, that interaction, man, like that's so different now. But I'm dating myself, but I just, like I said, I think that, like you said, it inspires us to push forward and try to regain some of that energy and that connectivity, that synergy. And again, applause to you for doing this, especially getting inside musicians and artists' heads. Everybody says, well, what do you put on bass? And they don't say, what do you like to eat for dinner? And we used to read those magazines, like Tiger Beat and all that stuff, and try to get, like, what does Prince eat for breakfast? Now, because of Dave Chappelle, we know he likes pancakes, but in the past, we didn't know that stuff. So it's good to get some insightful, deeper than the surface, more layers to the onion journalism. It's always great to see that. That shows depth, and I applaud that.
It's funny you mentioned Tiger Beat. As soon as you say Tiger Beat, I picture the closing credits on the movie Stripes, where John Candy makes the cover of Tiger Beat in like Teen World or one of those magazines.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Orange
love
whip,
Stripes.
Orange whip, orange whip, orange whip, 3 orange whips. All right, cool, man. Bringing it back. Langston, it's great to have you on the show. Tell us a little bit more in your own words about who you are and kind of introduce us to how you got started in this and briefly, but got into the music and the recording and stuff.
I got into music like most musicians do for selfish reasons. I wanted to hear my own work become something that people listened to and gave attention to. It started out with me writing raps when I was a little kid and watching like the evolution of hip hop in my local parks and city really take over the entire community, not just the Black community, but also the punk white community, the hard rock community. Like everybody was into something that was related to hip hop. And on top of that, because of that, those spaces that at one point in time may have been relegated to one subset of people now became relegated to many overlapping parts of different cultures. And that was something that really changed my perspective on music. You know what I'm saying? Like I wanted to be a part of that. You know, my mother used to talk about, you know, Motown and the British invasion. You know, my mother's a baby boomer. She was born in 1948. And so here I was in the early 80s. I was born in 77, watching people with spiked pink mohawks dance to Billie Jean on the corner next to the guy in the velour suit with the Kangol on and the gazelles, you know, and the big Dookie rope gold chain. And I'm like, man, like hip hop really is taking over, you know, and like really that was like the ingenue for my generation, you know, like this was the ultimate form of expression because it defied like so many different rules and expectations of what music is supposed to be. And anybody that didn't like hip hop, it made you like it more because it was kind of like, you know, it was like for hip hop, see in our eyes, we thought we were kind of like the fraternity. I always forget the name of it, but the fraternity in Animal House with Jim, you know, with Belushi and the rest of the gang. We were the misfits, you know, and
Try Lambda or Lambda or something.
Right. And so we looked at anybody that didn't like hip hop as the establishment. And like when you look at Animal House, the establishment, nobody wanted to be those people. So we wanted to be the cool kids, but we also knew that that meant departing from the path of what music really was expected to be at the time. We weren't going to fit any format. We weren't going to follow anybody else's rules because we were making them as we went. And I wanted to be part of that. And so in my efforts to become like the ultimate MC, the ultimate B-boy, and I started getting more into studio work and learning music structure. I also, when I started working at my uncle's place when I was a teenager, I also got strong-armed into engineering. You know, like he saw beyond my musical gifts. He saw the aptitude, you know, and I talk to people about this a lot that like, you know, we throw around the term engineer so loosely. Now I'm like, dude, you know, engineering is a science, right? Like you're supposed to be smart to do this. You're not supposed to be like just a rockin' guy. You're supposed to be like a learned person that has some grip on scientific and mathematic principles. You don't have to be great at them, but you should be aware of there's physics in music and recording, and there's math in calculating the speed of attack and release, and it all relates back to music notes. You know, there's some really high science in music, and my uncle was like trained like that from back in the days. You know what I'm saying? He grew up in New York City, but he lived in New Jersey. And so he saw me, this pimply face, you know, little black boy from upstate New York who had a gift or two potentially, and he wanted to harness that and show me some things, right? And so what he was doing was, you know, and I've spoken about this in other interviews, Gabe taught me how to be professional. Gabe taught me how to be competitive, but Gabe also taught me to embrace the fact that being smart was going to get you paid. Because for me, I just wanted to be cool. You know what I'm saying? I wanted to be an MC because we were out here in the streets, because I grew up in the ghetto. So it's like I was stuck in that mode, and he's like, listen, man, when you get older, you're going to remember what I told you. Like getting smart gets you paid. Being stupid gets you killed. You know, like got to learn the difference between what people need to see of you and who you need to be. Right? Because you can't be this person in your head forever, but you can take that intellect, you can learn things, you can educate yourself, and you can grow beyond this into something else as you get older. And like, he was like a prime example of the ultimate, you know, old school studio cat, right? Like he knew a little bit of everything, and there was stuff that he was really strong on and stuff that he's like, this isn't my area, you know? And that was like that was a big thing for me. But I got into, sessions working with Gabe, man, that like, you know, just blew my mind, you know, in terms of like the frequency of changes, you know, like we'd go from cutting hair metal to Latin jazz, to gospel music, you know, like old school contemporary gospel, you know what I'm saying? And then we get into, you know, these hardcore hip hop sessions with like blunts and guys talking about they just got out of jail. Like that wasn't part of the song. That was the conversation while bags of money were being passed, you know, crumpled up 20s. And like, and at the same time, not knowing who these people were. And all of a sudden you see them on BET, you know, and you're like, oh shit, that's the guy that was, you know, and like that stuff, you know, that stuff made me understand things about just, being blessed with the opportunity to work with a consummate professional on professionals, right? Like a lot of us don't get those opportunities anymore where when you go into a session, you don't really need to engineer, you just need to archive, because the players or the talent is so strong in the room. And like that stuff changed my thinking about, working with other people, how I can be better at what I do. And also that I loved, being really into the recording process, not just, setting up mics and that sounds good, but also like really getting into calculating distances between microphones and stuff that Gabe showed me, learning guitar amps, like just like becoming like that invaluable guy, right? It turned me into like, an encyclopedia because I would be in situations where Gabe had showed me, hey, by the way, this old blues cat showed me that actually the equalizer on this guitar amp is not set up the way you think it is. It's not like a studio EQ. This just means it cuts versus boost. So if you actually change the way the settings are on this guitar and you show him how to do it this way, you can actually get a better tone that's juicier and he can back off on the volume and then control like it was like, and then like the dude would try it and he'd be like, holy shit, that's my amp, and I loved being that kid that could just like amaze people with those little tidbits of trivia because that's how you built relationships. You know what I'm saying? Like being able to show players different stuff, being able to recognize the different drums on a kit, not just the difference between a floor tom and a snare. I mean, but like, oh shit, that's an Acrolite snare, or that's, you know what I'm saying? Or this is, the old school Remo heads, or these are the Zildjians that, so-and-so used, like that sort of stuff helps you become more familiar with music, but also from the practitioner point of these are people that just like a carpenter, just like a doctor, just like a computer technician, their tools are an extension of who they are. And learning how those musicians connect with that stuff makes you a better engineer, in my opinion. It makes you a better record producer, right? And that sort of stuff, just moving forward into the now, that's also what influenced me to say, you know what? There are tools that engineers need and record producers need that make them feel like they're familiar with it, but not from the aspect of just strictly the ergonomic, but literally from the mental side of it, the spiritual side of it. Like that's a sound I've always wanted. Like that's the sort of thing I like to create, is gear that gives people that sensation. And that came from those interactions with those musicians where they're like, yo, dude, like if you ever heard these jazz rides or these I put a pair of 18s on my hi-hat, or I take two top hats and make hi-hats, and that's my disco 70s chicka 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 on the hi-hat. Like they were just, you know what I mean? Like they were just so into their stuff. And I can't imagine me being any different as a recording engineer. Like I love 1176s. I love like turning the knobs on good sounding equipment. And like each one of them becomes like my shit, right? Like, oh, yo, if you take a 1073 and you attenuate it here, and then you don't go past this and you got a hot mic, you get this effect. Like that sort of stuff is, like we call it geeking out. Well, musicians did the same thing. And learning that didn't make them like weird. It made them something else. That was like, aha. So like this dude, he's all about his cymbals. So like, I got to make sure that his cymbals are recorded well. This dude's all about that kick drum that he got from 1950, that Slingerland kick that's like the size of a battleship. He loves that kick. That kick drum sound that I give him has to make him feel like he's hearing what he hears in his head when he's playing without headphones on. Like that sort of stuff really triggered those impulses in me. And like, that's the sort of stuff I learned in Jersey, man, was like how to really connect with the band quickly and trying to figure out who's into what based on their instrument and based on their spirit. Like that's the kind of stuff Gabe was big on. He's like, yo, I got to know these people. He would hang with the band a bunch of times before he cut them. It was crazy. Like he used to like sit with them so much and like eat, smoke, drink, and it was like a family reunion every time people came to work with him. And I really admired that. And that's something that I do to this day when I produce records. Like I got to know you. Like, I mean, maybe not in the way that I know my oldest best friend, but I got to know you. I can't just put mics up and rush you out of my set. I got to like get to know you a little bit. Even when I do live sound, dude, I hang with the band. A lot of engineers, dude, they just sit back and smell funny. That's my joke. Like they just sit there, dude, they set the stage up. They do a throw and go. Their sound checks are terrible. The musicians are frustrated. I hang with them. I'm talking with them when I'm setting up DI boxes and putting mics on stage. I'm connecting with them. I cannot work with people and be so dissociated from them. It doesn't make sense for me because it's like I want to get excited about what they do. You know what I mean? That makes me a better engineer. That makes me a better deliverer of goods. So that sort of thing with me, even with my customers to this day, like I got to kind of know you a little bit because you know what I'm saying? I'm giving you my baby. So it's like, I don't want you to look at my baby like it's a problem. I want you to be able to take care of it and let it take care of you. So
how do you go about getting to know bands now in the studio? I mean, you know, taking that extra time, sometimes people could feel conflicted about the use of time. Have you found smart ways to just get to hang with the band and get to really know them before, but not feel like you're somehow slowing down the recording process if you want to keep being really productive?
If I had a book title, it would be How to Politely Be an Asshole.
Nice.
Dude, no, I'm telling you, I talk to people that produce bands all the time and they don't understand that there is such a thing as having standards and there is such a thing as having a way to diplomatically get your way with bands. And so my thing is, I don't consider me understanding your vibe a waste of time, right? Because I've heard plenty of bands get recorded, but they weren't captured. Their instruments were, but they weren't captured. And so me getting to know you only makes me connect with you quicker, faster. And my thing is too, when I go into a session, I want to have a vision of what you're supposed to sound like. You get what I'm saying? Like a lot of bands that work with me don't really know their sound. They know their style. Those are two different things. I want to know what your sound, because I'm a record producer. I'm not a live show producer. I'm not a production manager. I'm a record producer. I'm supposed to be the best liar in the room. I'm supposed to say, yep, this guy sounded like this and that at the same time as this other guy, even though they didn't play at the same time. And these strings all married to the record this way. And that takes vision, that takes time, but it also, I think, takes an exchange of energy. It's just like, you know, I go off on tangents a lot, so you got to forgive me. But like, if you're in a relationship with someone else, right? There are studies that say that if you hug them for longer than 20 seconds, you exchange energy, right? And so my thing is, when I'm with a band, it's not, hey, what's up? Where's my envelope of money? All right, motherfucker, go over there and set your drum kit out. It's like, no. It's like, hey, what's up, man? How you doing? I listened to your last demo. That's number one, right? I looked you guys up. I see that you're heavily influenced by Seether. I hear that you guys really dig Mudbone. I hear that you guys are into this. You know what I mean? I see that you like to play Trainer. You know, like these sorts of stuff is what gets them talking, because I want to get to know a little bit of their personality, and also like, just like, what are they excited about this process? Like, what do you hope to get? You know, and even if that is on the same day that you're going to do, like you're going to get tones, you might cut a couple of lay down tracks just to see how things are going. Are you happy? Do you need to switch out some of your snare stuff, or, you know, maybe one with a fatter strainer? Yeah. That sort of stuff needs to happen. And if people push back on that, I always say, hey, look, man, you've invested your money, but now this is the part where I have to do my job, right? So I'm never going to tell you how to play unless I think you really need to. So you can tell me if you think I'm doing something that's a waste of your time, but at the same time, I need to work on you, right? And your time is more valuable to me than to you, because I'm being paid to be here. So like, this is how I get, you know, and again, on top of that, not to rest on my laurels, but a lot of bands I've worked with have won awards and things like that. So I always try to like make sure, look, I want you to be next. I want you to be that next band that gets recognized for the songwriting, for the right. And the thing, and I always pitch it to people this way, is that the reason why people get recognized for their gifts is because the way we engineer records is supposed to make you forget that it was engineered, even if it's done so creatively and so dope and so different. The whole point is just to make you forget you're listening to a record and you connect with the artist, right? Like when you listen to Purple Haze, Eddie Kramer engineered the fuck out of that record, but all I hear is Jimmy. Right, I don't hear the engineering, right? And like, that's my motto for everything, is like, my job is to engineer you into a point where you forget about me and people focus on you. And that takes, you know what I'm saying? That takes time.
Yeah, no, I was going to comment on your 20-second hug analogy. I thought that was great. And I was thinking about that for a second. I was like, 20 seconds. I was like, wow, that is a long hug. But then I also thought, Man, you could give every member of the band a 20-second hug in less than 2 minutes in most bands that walk in the studio.
We don't spend a lot of time with each other, man. Like, we're always in a rush. And for what? You know what I mean? Like, a band will rush to get an album done and then not release it for 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, people say, well, that's the industry. I'm like, yeah, but like, what's the industry now? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, what's the industry if you're an independent band? You're on tour. Where? Down the street? Okay, fine. I get it, but like, why are you rushing out of here?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with money. Like, people are like, oh, if I spend too much time, then I'm going to spend too much money, you know? And so I got to like be succinct. You know, you get these guys that are acting or these ladies that act as band managers, but really they're just kind of like, okay, I'm paying for this, so we can't waste time doing X, Y, Z. And it's like, sometimes that extra 5 minutes is the difference between a great record or a bum take. Mm-hmm. That's the reality of it. I've met so many people that just could have took 5 more minutes to get their overhead set right before they realize, shit, the cymbals are too loud in the overheads. Well, you can't undo that with automation. You're just going to be stuck with it.
Yeah,
right?
That's the truth, man. That's
so
the
like,
truth.
take that time, and the band will always thank you for it at the end. They will never hurt you for sounding their best, ever.
So I love hearing you talk about this philosophy of going and starting a record and working with bands and stuff. And these are all great tips, but I imagine that you must have had to learn some of these the hard way. So I wonder if you could maybe share like a story about an important failure for you or kind of a nightmare in the studio that you remembered that became a real learning experience around this stuff or around just making a great record.
I could definitely tell you the one situation that really burned me the worst was going into a studio, because I used to freelance a lot. I went into a studio and I didn't know if the studio was functional before I booked it.
Oh, man.
So the band shows up. I show up an hour and a half earlier, right? And I paid for this time too. And the interfaces are acting crazy. And the guy's like, oh, you know, it never does this. You know, da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, dude, like, what do you mean it never does this? Like, this is ADAT. It was like ADAT interfaces, they go into light pipe. It wasn't like ADAT machines. It wasn't anything crazy like that. But basically, they were on the fritz. It was an old Pro Tools system, you know, like a Digi 001. And it didn't like the light pipe cable or something like that. And it's not something I just carry around in my bag. Here, I'm just going to take some fiber optic cable with me and get on the setter bus. You know, like, I expect you to have your working system. And about 20 minutes in, now, mind you, they were there early before their session was due to begin. But because the session was fucked, right? In their eyes, they were like, you know what, dude? We're going to cancel and go somewhere else. So I was out of $1,000, right? Because of a very simple, avoidable, unfortunate, yet very teachable moment for me, because a studio that I was paying maybe $300 out of that $1K had equipment that didn't function, and they weren't being honest with themselves or me. And I had to absorb that loss. So what I did from that point on was, like I said, how to politely be an asshole, right? So instead of just taking people's word for it, because you'd be shocked, there's pictures of studios on the internet right now where half that gear doesn't work. No pun intended. So I would just say, okay, well, if your gear works, do you mind if I stop by? And a lot of people would get offended by that. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going somewhere else. And they would get all infuriated and everything. I'm just like, you know what? If it's good, you don't mind if somebody comes by, especially just for me to see if everything is working. Even if it's 24 hours or 48 hours before the session. I'm not trying to do it to interrupt your flow of work. I just want to make sure your setting is okay, right? And that was another key piece of me improving my business model, was making sure that everything was right as a record producer for a band, instead of just, trust me, I got this. And then I'm putting my life in the hands of people that I may or may not know or have a good relationship with. Instead, what I did was, I was a polite asshole. I'd be like, well, I'm coming anyways, right? And I would take that extra time and I would go and inspect everything, even if it meant just like, you know, checking to see if the computer started up right away, making sure headphones worked, you know, and be like, look, oh, you're bitching and moaning here. It's $35. Okay. I'm gonna spend extra money to make sure your shit works, so I don't lose a couple K.
Yeah.
Based on, you know what I mean? And that was a hard lesson, but I was like, this shit ain't happening. That's me. I'm like, this ain't happening to me again. No, not me.
Yeah.
Last time I'm doing this, you know?
When I do a session here, you know, and I'm going to do a tracking session with a band, I love to, in fact, I almost won't even do it unless I can at least have the drummer drop off a drum kit the night before, mic everything up, get everything ready to go so that when we start out the session, you know, we still might lose an hour. It's not really a loss, but it'd take an hour just to sound check everything. But that time is spent actually just settling everybody into their sound and their headphones and their mix, and being ready to rock. And it just makes the day go so much better. And then everybody starts out fresh and you're super productive during the recording day. So I completely agree with you on that stuff.
Well, I'll tell you a trick, right? The reason why I do that with, the reason why I do that with drummers is because A, they're always the latest person next to the bassist or the lead singer. But B, psychologically speaking, if a pair of people walk in the room that play stringed instruments, right? And there's a guy playing drums already, they want to play along. I don't know why. I call it the Guitar Center effect. But if there's a cat playing some, you know, he's like playing drums, and then somebody plugs in, you know, they start, like somebody just wants to play, right? Yeah. And what you're doing in that setting is encouraging the band to, which is something that people just don't do in sessions anymore. Do I sound old? They don't warm up. They just come in, all right, plug in McGee. We're ready. We're going to start with song one. I'm like, why don't you guys rehearse? Get used to the room, get dialed in, get used to the space a little bit, and learn the environment. You know what I mean? Like, everybody practices for a little bit at a show. So why would you not do that at a studio? Oh, because of money? All right, fine. But at least, like, you know, sometimes you got to kind of build that into your business model of saying, all right, look, we're not going to start until X time. If you guys get here early, the drums are already set up, come in here. Sometimes there's people in the band that play more than one instrument. That's always nice. So somebody else might hop in the kit if someone's late. And all of a sudden they're warming up, they're getting in tune. They might start reviewing their stuff. And that's where you want them. You want them limber. You want them loose. You want them like, you know what I mean? You want them warmed up. You want them to really feel like they're ready to go instead of just like jumping into it. I've had too many sessions where I'm sitting around waiting for someone to show up. And again, not going to happen to me twice. Drums are set up, but now everybody else is fucking late, you know? And that's like, you know, so that's why it's like, you got to kind of almost manipulate people. Hey, look, I'm going to be here. I need you here. Otherwise, I'm going to start your time. Like, you kind of have to really, nowadays, especially because people have so many distractions, you have to really be on your clients so that they're timely. Not even for your own sake, even though that's the main idea, especially if you have sessions in the same day with two different people or two different clients. But you really got to like get on them in a nice, polite, asshole-ish way and just be like, hey, look, you know, we're going to start now. I need you here at this time. Even if you give them a time that's too early, if you're a punctual person, at least like as a studio owner, it's always good just to be there. And then if you get one or two guys there and then the other guys are late, but they're late for you, but technically they're on time for their session time, that's a win because there's plenty of coffee in the studio lounge. You know, I can read a book or something. I can get ready for the session. I can double check all my connections and my patch. That type of stuff's invaluable to me, but you have to really be on top of people to get it, especially with a lot of players. Like I've done sessions, dude, there's like 12 people. And like, that's a lot of like excuses waiting to happen about why somebody's.
No doubt, man.
So
when I do a 12-person session, it's usually like a hot, you know, jazz band or brass band or something like that down at Bonnaroo. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free introduction to mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you are in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Well, right on, man. Well, tell us a little bit about your studio, Narrative Audio. What's that place like?
Well, it's interesting. It's in the basement of a church on the south side of Syracuse. It kind of borders the west and south side. And it is a interesting little setup because what happens is that I take a room that used to be part of a daycare. So it's like a big, giant open classroom, which is about 1,000 square feet, right? And then inside the classroom, there's an office off to the side of that room. And that's actually a 400 square foot room that I use as a control room / small tracking studio in addition to that. So when I have bands, I have them in the classroom, which is great. Ceilings are about 10 feet high. The room is about, like I said, 100 square feet. So there's a big, big, big wide open space from front and to side to side. Front to back and side to side, there's a lot of room, And what you can get away with in there, which is really nice, is you can have mics all the far end of the room. So if you're trying to do a room sound for drums, if you're trying to do ensemble, people have a lot of space. There's outlets everywhere.
Yeah, that's so key.
And the nice thing is that I kind of, I used to be really big on the controlled studio environment thing, and I still enjoy that. But I'm also, like previously before Narrative Audio, I had a space with an old business partner called Studio Dog Pro, and the entire space was made of found materials, right? We did like 85% recycled materials to make that space. So we used like pallet walls filled with fiberglass, you know what I mean? And we kind of made like a lot of diffuse areas happen. And that studio was fantastic. Poured concrete slab floor. We had a drumbrella in there, 13-foot high ceilings, 30 by 30 live room. It was sick, right? But I'm also somebody that has also learned how to record in less than ideal situations. So in a way, narrative is more about the found space thing rather than found material. So like, look, if a classroom is all I got to cut drums in and they're on carpet, or I can put them on a little tile floor by the sink, I'll make that work the best that I can. And I've actually gotten like better drum sounds out of that space, strangely, than I have in the other one. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's a little larger, but it kind of forces you to think and operate differently. So like that's the studio. And you notice I'm not talking about gear. I have a lot of different gear. I have a lot of SM57 clones that I bought from Walmart.com by a company called Pile. And I outfitted them with 45-degree PVC connectors. So I disassembled them and made them right angle SM57 knockoffs. Nice. I rewired them. And I actually cut some really sick drums with them all the time. I record with, very traditional stuff. Like I have a bunch of mics from JJ Audio, like U80, like a JJ Audio Greyhound, which is a U87 clone. I have a U77, which is another Neumann microphone, which is like a transformerless U87 kind of thing, with a higher polarization voltage on the capsule, but I have it outfitted with a K47 from Bee's Knees. So it's kind of like a darker U87 inspired thing with a really huge low end.
A darker U87. They're already a little bit dark to begin with.
Yeah, but darker than that. Great for female vocals. You know what I'm saying? Plus it's intimate. You get real close to it. A lot of very known brands too. So like I have a lot of oddball mics. Like I have some AKG D190Es, which are the grandchild to the D19 that the Beatles used a lot. I'm really big into Abbey Road sounds and EMI. I'm a huge fan of, he passed away, I think last year, Jeff Emmerich, or this year. I was a huge fan of his. I read his book. I studied his work a lot. I loved the stuff he was doing with the Beatles. I liked the mics that they use. Dude, if you get a pair of D190s, they sound like, Rubber Soul and Revolver. It's nuts. Like if you put them on drums in Glenn Johns, it sounds like Abbey Road in the Dead Room. It's bananas.
Nice.
They were like $150 for a pair. Okay.
Tell us, the D190 is the dynamic?
Yeah, it's a D190.
They were hanging over the drum kit?
Yeah, and the thing about them is they're spun brass for the head basket, so it looks like pins for the head basket for the mic. They look bananas. I also have a lot of like weird mics. Like I'm big into there's a company called Uher, UHER. There's like an M514, which is a tape recorder mic, but the capsule on that thing is like the size of a plum. And it's got some crazy sick drum sounds in it. I collect a lot of weirdo mics because I like weird sounds for drums, because I believe that like there's a thing where if you combine really filtered sounding captures of certain parts of the kit and you blend them with normal sounding captures, you get a really rich harmonic thing that covers the spectrum for drums.
Nice.
I got ribbon mics. I got a CAD D82, which is just a stock ribbon mic that I love to pieces. Some tube mics here and there that I've made, but the gear itself, in terms of like non-mic related stuff, obviously I have Zulu. I have a Rane MS1B. I bought a lot of mic preamps on eBay that were like these oddball off-name brands that had transformers on the inputs. Mm-hmm. So I would modify them with direct out. So I'd have like 16 channels of, really colored mic pre's, but I'd buy them for like $5.
Yeah.
And they would be like, like for universities and stuff like that, but they'd sound really, really good on drums or guitars. So I did a lot of that. I have a console there, a Wheatstone SP5A, which is a 46 channel board, the frame that I have. It's got transformers on every input, plus and minus 18 volt rails with 5582 op amps. So it's got a really nice headroom to it.
Yeah.
But the transformer has got like a kind of nice, from what I understand, they're supposed to be amorphous. So it's a nickel steel combo on the input. So it's got a real fat kind of API-ish tone. And man, those things on drums and on vocals are bananas. I love them to pieces. I bought the whole freaking console, believe it or not, $400.
That's awesome. Hey, I know that one of the things you did before or after your uncle's, before you did your studio, I think was your time at JJ Microphones, right?
Yes,
JJ
sir.
Audio. Can you tell us a little bit before we take a break too, about some of the things that you remember learning about microphones that have really sort of transformed your understanding of mics and what's possible?
That we need to get out of our own way when it comes to microphones. One of my biggest takeaways from working side by side with Jim for, my God, like almost a decade was this. We want to recreate the past so bad that we halt progress. And the way that old school mics were made, it was because those were the limitations of the technology on hand at the time. And also the aesthetic at the time was more so about appeasing the broadcast codes and making standards that everybody could embrace, right? And that were endorsed by governing bodies for broadcast. There were laws, there were regs for all of this stuff, right? That's fantastic. We used to chase U87s, C800Gs. We were one of the first companies ever to truly clone a C800G from capsule all the way to the transformer. We did all these amazing things, 251s, C12s, U47s, U67s, and so on, right? But the one thing that I took away from it that used to always bother me a little bit, right, was all of the technology and circuits that exist in other gear can exist in microphones, but does not. I'll say that again. All the technology that exists in other pieces of gear can exist in microphones, but does not. So for example, there's no compression circuitry that we intentionally put into microphones, at least not in all. I know of one where it does exist, but we could. Mm-hmm. We don't. You get what I'm saying? We could, but we don't, right? Like there's FETs in microphones. There's FETs in 1176s. We're not manipulating them
right
to act like 1176s, but we could. Okay, same thing with equalization. There's equalization circuits that would work in microphones. They could exist, but we don't. And that kind of was like the thing that, why aren't we making microphones that do X, Y, and Z from the flick of a switch or from some external control, or, have the signal from a microphone flow at a certain operating level into a controller box that then manipulates the signal even further, and then your mic output comes out. Like that type of stuff is what used to flow through my head. Maybe one day those ideas will come to fruition if they're not stolen after people listen to this interview, which happens a lot to me, believe it or not. But the thing is that I felt like microphones twofold. A, because we were one of the first companies to really go in the direction that JJ went in terms of the way microphones looked, the face of the company, you had a Caucasian man and a black person as partners. And the black guy was like the one that spoke the most and was seen the most, right? Like that was new for the audio tech industry, big time new, right? Opened a lot of different conversations and a lot of different doors because of that. But B, once we began to preach the gospel of that so many times over and many people began to try to replicate what we were doing, it became a thing where it's like what you wanted to happen, was we wanted to make a middle market for microphones. We wanted to make a sub $1,000 market for certain mics happen. once that became everybody's business model, it was kind of like, well, unless we start doing different things, where are we going to go with this? Now we're just talking about costs of goods sold versus margin. We're not talking about creativity anymore. We're not talking about art. And I had really kind of come full circle too with people were trying to get mics modded because they didn't like the way digital recordings sounded, right? And I kind of was like, well, the reason why you don't like the way your mic sounds is because A, what is your microphone going into? And B, what does that go into before it goes into your computer? And I kept seeing the same equation. It's like, well, everything that we have now, modern equipment, even if they're clones of previous things, modern microphones, even if they're recreations of past things, or the actual real things, like a real Neumann U87 or real U67. We never knew what these things sounded like until mid 90s, early 2000s off tape. We only heard them on tape, to tape, to tape, again and again and again. We never heard them out of that context. And so it kept coming back to me. It's like, shit, what if the whole time we've been taking these new tools and replacing them with old tools, but we never fixed the problem. We just kept attacking the symptom instead of finding a solution, right? And so that was kind of like the thing that made me start developing Zulu, right? Now, in terms of what I learned at JJ Audio outside of those things, I learned a shit ton of stuff from Tom Reichenbach, Oliver Arcoot when they were alive. Like those two guys used to mentor this shit out of me. They saw something in me that no one else did. You'd be surprised. I used to call people up on the phone and they'd be like, kid, I don't have time to talk to you. Tom Reichenbach, at one of the most respected lineages in audio transformer history. That guy, right? You got to remember who his dad was and what his dad gave to the world, right? Like you like 1176s, okay? Then you like his dad's work. You know what I mean? Like his dad was like that guy, like, oh, I'm going to make a transformer for this EQ. I'm going to make a transformer for this console. Like he was giving the world rock and eventually funk and eventually hip hop. Like he gave us the actual instruments we communicated with through the virtue of what he was fabricating through the work that he conducted in his lab, right? And then this is the son of that guy who inherited that legacy, right? Because Reichenbach, the story goes, I believe, somebody will probably write me a nasty email, but this is what I briefly and vaguely remember, is the Reichenbach legacy goes that it split into Jensen and then it split into Cinemac, right? So you're talking to somebody that's from the root of that, right? That guy had time for me and other people didn't. So screw y'all, but the big boss, the big Don used to talk to me. He'd hold calls when I called him, okay? That's how nice that man was to me. And he taught me so many invaluable skills. And he also taught me the gift of being kind to others when they want to learn something. That was a key thing that Tom gave to me that always was amazing, is that him and Oliver, they would give you time. Another dude used to talk to me a lot is, and I still talk to him, I still show him a lot of love whenever I see him, is Larry from 80K. Very kind, very giving, very free with information, not afraid to share, to teach younger people. I like people that teach. My parents are teachers, right? But I like that in the audio industry, that people know their time is limited and finite, right? Yeah. And so guys like that would just share with me. And then I would learn. And then I would go and apply what I learned to transformer design, to requesting things of our vendors, to imagining what we needed microphones to do more of as recording engineers and record producers that they weren't doing, right? Like I've had an idea for a long time, but it doesn't really seem to go anywhere, so I might have to do it. Maybe somebody will take it from this podcast. I always thought it would be really cool if we could change the way U47 sounded on the fly, not just in terms of putting some equalization circuit into it, but literally, what if you played with the way the tube and the transformer interact? Right? So you change the transformer's winding or something routed from the tube. That type of stuff was what I was talking to Tom about before he passed away. He really liked that concept of having like a dual path U47. Like those sorts of conversations came from our relationship, right? And I learned that during my tenure at JJ Audio. I learned a ton from Jim. Jim was also like those guys. He shared. He wasn't afraid to give information away to people, especially to me. He mentored me a lot. He gave me a lot of what I consider my first real entrance into the music tech industry. In a time when, and I say this because this is kind of like the deal, right? Like in a time when you didn't see people that look like me really doing this, right? And like he gave me that entrance, you know what I'm saying? He was kind enough and open-minded enough to see that like there was something in me that was worth his time, right? And so we began to learn from one another, right? And so I also found very quickly that the music tech industry was, you know, specifically kind of catering to one type of buyer, right? And that's like, so I was like, wow, this is a big, giant, gaping hole in the market. You know, like, like, you know, like literally, like I used to, you know, I talk to people about this all the time. I know guys that have Grammys, platinum records, TV deals, you name it, dude. And like, they've never been contacted by any of these mic companies because they make the wrong type of music.
That's wild.
You know?
Well, hey, let's take let's pause for just a sec. I love hearing all these stories. We're going to take a break now for the jam session, and Rockstars will come back in to talk more with Langston about. We're going to dig really into Zulu and start talking about that, and talk about some of these great sounds you're creating and how we can basically work in this digital world, but start bringing back some of the beauty and the wonder of analog. Analog tape, particularly. Rockstars, a reminder that we'll have links to everything we're talking about in the show notes. If you're on your mobile device, just click through right now. There'll be a YouTube playlist there that will show off Zulu from Langston and from Handsome Audio and some of the music that you're recording. And we'll see you guys in just a minute for the jam session. Are you using a Mac in your recording studio? Are you tired of feeling like the studio setup you worked so hard to create is becoming obsolete too quickly? Wouldn't it feel great to have a trusted friend to help you keep your existing Mac and studio setup current and relevant so that you can focus on the thing you love most, which is making great music? Well, now you can rely on OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, whose mission it is to help you get the most mileage out of your existing Mac. Whether you need to upgrade your RAM, install an SSD drive, add more connectivity, or simply find a great used Mac that's ready to rock, OWC will help take your studio far into the future with a vast library of DIY install videos, 24/7 friendly support, and free shipping in the US on most items over $49. Why get frustrated and ditch your existing computer when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. If you want to capture every nuance of a great performance in your studio, then you need to start with a microphone that is crafted with great care and attention to detail. JZ Mics in Riga, Latvia designs amazing sounding microphones that are handcrafted with jeweler's precision to bring you incredible detail in your recordings. At the heart of JZ Microphones is the unique Golden Drop capsule design, which uses a lighter, faster diaphragm that delivers great clarity and fidelity while avoiding distracting colorations and distortions. Make sure to check out the Vintage Series V67 and V11 with Class A discrete amplifier circuitry, extremely low self-noise, and advanced built-in shock mount technology to bring a classic, expensive vintage sound to your studio for an affordable price. JZ offers a 5-year warranty, free shipping to the US, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Plus, for a limited time, you can use the coupon code ROCKSTAR to get 50% off their Vintage Series microphones. I got one. You're hearing my voice right now on the V67. Wouldn't it feel great to have one of these in your studio? Go to jzmic.com or click the link in the show notes below. Hey Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Langston Masingale, joining us from New York State and talking about his Handsome Audio company and Zulu and just making great records. So we'll jump right in and dig more into recording and talk about analog. Langston, you ready to jam?
Oh yeah, man. Let's do this.
All right, man. So I know you've been very patient with me. I haven't asked you any questions about Zulu yet, but let's do it. Tell us about Zulu. What is it? How did it come about? Give us an introduction.
Well, Zulu is the world's first passive analog tape simulator. It requires no phantom power, no battery power. It does not run on an actual power source. It is literally a device that simply passes signal through a very complex labyrinth of circuits that allow me to design a process that simulates the behaviors and interaction of the different components of what I consider the analog tape transfer process. It uses made in the USA Ultron transformers. It uses a special brew of trade secret circuitry to accomplish these effects, but it does use a ton of feedback loops inside of it. It uses a really unique process so that the amount of loss that is experienced by this passive transfer is very minimal. At 1 kilohertz, for example, you only lose about 8 dB, and that's only if you're peaking at 0. Because of the way Zulu is designed, it also simulates the way the tape is in terms of you're able to drive it exceptionally hot and still get a usable musical signal. Now, why this is important is because Zulu originally was designed from a mixing standpoint because everybody loves to mix nowadays instead of record. But my pushback against that was, okay, now that we've accomplished a great mix down platform, I want to make this where it's excellent for recording purposes, mainly because I meet tons of producers all the time that have amazing vintage mic preamps, right? But the output is too damn hot to go into a digital interface. So they have to put on this other attachment to attenuate it. Now, the trick with it is sometimes that has a sound, right, that is not tailorable to the producer's ear. So they're kind of in a jam and in a conundrum where they get the operating level correct, but they're not really getting what they want because it's been, hampered or tampered with by that. So what Zulu is supposed to do is take that energy, soak it up, act like a tape machine, mess with your transient response while still sounding like the source a ton, and then give you usable signal to the computer when you cut. So we modeled 3 different types of tape machines. We did a Swiss machine, which is modeled after a machine that rhymes with booter. We also did a Japanese machine, which is known as the Profi deck, which is modeled after my uncle's. The Japanese, the ASCAM and EAC machines that we had at the studio that ran 1-inch and 2-inch tape, along with the cassette-based multi-track, which is the lo-fi deck, right? We also have adjustable bias curve on the machine. We have a headroom control, which actually controls the headroom of the electronics in the machine, so it shifts where the machine itself will saturate, let alone the tape. And then in addition to that, we have a 4th control on the top of the box that actually controls what's known as the enhance curve, which actually allows you to dial in dry signal from the input of Zulu, but it's harmonically enhanced above 4K. So what that gives you, it gives you the transient response and some of the brightness of the audio before the tape process kicks in. And it gives you like this push-pull effect because it's actually a parallel control that engages in feedback. So even when you're dialing in the wet, right, of the tape or the dry of the enhance, those 2 controls feed into each other, those 2 signal paths. So it's impacting the other. So it's like an interactive dry wet control. I kind of felt that was a really musical approach that hadn't really been done before. So I added that. And then on the back of Zulu, which is on the desktop version anyways, is what's known as the calibration control. And the original name for that was the form switch, but basically that's meant to model different types of tape formulas. So you have like the lowest grade, low headroom formula you can get, which is called TK mode. And then so on, you have MX mode, which covers like early formulations. So we're talking about things like MPEX 456. Then you get into the oddball generation of GP9 499. And then HX mode is supposed to be the current generation of plus 12 tape like ATR. Which, has very, very little compression. And to quote one producer, is like digital with hiss. Because it's an all analog process, it doesn't quite sound like ATR. It's better than ATR tape. In terms of color, I think ATR is better at fidelity. But I meet so many guys that record to ATR that use a ton of stuff to color it before it actually gets recorded. So I figured, why not just give you something that delivers it that way. And because of the circuitry and the modeling that goes on inside Zulu, all of these controls affect each other. So it's like intelligent design, man. It's like, imagine a tape machine that had a soul, that had a sensibility and artificial intelligence to it. So it's like responding to your choices in a way that follows your musical style. And it's a sensory tactile experience as well. So because everything on Zulu is stepped, right? I addressed the issue of recall. A lot of guys buy great gear. Oh shit, I got to take a picture of it because I might have to recall this session. Well, Zulu is like the engineer's busy box. It's got a lot of click, click, clack, clack, click, click, clack kind of stuff going on like Frankenstein's lab. And you take a picture. If it's on 12 o'clock, when you turn it to 12 o'clock again, it's the exact same sound. We use 1% military resistors. We use ladders inside there to do our controls. Everything is really high precision. Our matching is ridiculous. We get 0.1 dB difference between the channels. That's our standard.
Nice.
Right? Versus most companies accept 1 dB. We try to do 0.1 dB.
So how do we use this thing? I mean, basically, we've just got a couple of inputs. Each box is stereo, and we've got a couple of inputs.
Stereo, dual mono. You can use the inputs and outputs separately. So you can use left and right as like kick and snare, for example.
So it sort of has a linkable feature in there, or is that not necessary?
You can set the channels exactly the same and get a stereo result.
Right.
That's why it's stepped. But no, basically, like, let's say you have like a bunch of mic pre's with some outputs or console with direct outs, right? Or insert outs. You can run them right into Zulu and drive Zulu with the preamp. And one of the amazing things about that is because it's live, there's no latency. If you're a player and you're a one-man show, you can adjust Zulu while you play into it and get the sound that you're after, which is something that Alan Evans does a lot. He actually calibrates it and changes the controls as he's playing to base, his foundational elements like the rhythm bed on that tone. And that live instantaneous feedback piece, I think, is superior to plugins alone, let alone the actual sound itself. But just the fact that there's no latency, there's no delay, there's nothing to play around. It's literally just integrated right into your recording chain as long as you have standalone mic pre's, or you can do it in post.
Not even tape would give you that. You don't even get that benefit from using tape because you'd have the delay off the repro.
Absolutely not. And then on top of that, like I said, you can take your vintage mic pre's or your modern mic pre's that emulate vintage circuits, and you can drive the shit out of this thing. So what I love about it is we have to be so careful nowadays when we record, right? And because of digital converters. But this thing allows you to do what we used to get trained not to do when we transitioned to digital. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't go too hot. Especially when we got off 16-bit and went to 24. Remember, 16-bit could take more level. 24 can't. So we have to be more careful nowadays. But with this, you can pummel Zulu with input level and then still get that safe operating level as the output. That's like the joy of it, is that you get your color, but you get the level you need. You know what I'm saying? And then on top of that, because Zulu compresses like a tape machine, you find yourself using less compression. Like Alan tracks drums, for example. I use him a lot because Alan records so much and all he cuts with is Zulu.
We talked about it a lot on his interview. He was really excited about it.
He doesn't cut drums with compression. Not the kick, not the snare, not the nothing. And he barely does anything in the box. He doesn't mix on a console anymore. He mixes entirely in Studio One. And what I think is amazing is that when I developed this platform, I wasn't really fully aware of all the advantages of it. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I just made it work. I made it good. I was happy with it. But then when people got their hands on it and they began to take off with it and do wild stuff with it, I was like, oh, snap. Like, I didn't realize people would get rid of their compressors because this thing does the job compressors won't, right? Like, it's not a joke when you can take an overhead mic and it doesn't screw your levels up because it's not based on gain versus threshold. It's based on gain versus saturation. Right? It's based on saturation versus compression. That's a different set of parameters to mess around with versus, okay, I've squashed the whole kit based on whatever the side chain of the compressor is set to, and now I have to make the level back up. Versus the way Zulu functions is just like a tape machine. You don't really destroy the transient the same way you would with a compressor, and you don't change perspective as much. So you get a much more closer to the source kind of sound, but it just sounds bigger. And it takes advantage of the increased RMS level. So you get those bigger, fatter kicks. You get those huge smacking snares. And then because you get the roll off of the top end, everything just sounds so much better. I don't
Yeah.
mean like a filter. Like a lot of guys have, said, I can just apply a low pass filter and get the same thing. No, you can't. That plays with the phase of the recording. This accomplishes it at a level that makes the phase far smaller. There's less penalty, and it sounds more like a recording, right? Like we've been in those situations where you do those heavy cuts with a digital equalizer or even with an analog one, right? This isn't an equalizer. This is something that plays with the saturation coefficient based on spectral content and based on amplitude, so that when you're getting, when you compress more with Zulu, you get saturation as an artifact. But then because there's still a slight, tiny, microscopic amount of the dry that comes through because the enhance and tape controls overlap and feed back into each other, some of that tiny bit of the dry comes through. And that's something that I caught with tape, because I always describe it as the pizza dough effect. It's like you make a dent in pizza dough and you fold over it and the other dough covers the dent, but the dent's still there. You just can't see it anymore, right? And like that's how tape is. It's like when I look at the waveforms off a Studer when I peg it or a Tascam, the transient doesn't really square wave on tape. What it does is it's like somebody took the finger of God and pushed it back into the body of the program material.
Right.
So that's why it looks square from a distance. But then when you get up close and you zoom in, oh shit, them peaks just went down some.
Yeah.
Versus the shape of the peak changes. No, that's not what happens at all. And so that was the hardest thing to model, but we got it. Was getting it where you do that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Why don't you introduce us a little bit? Because you remember a lot of people listening to this, rock stars are know about tape, but maybe don't really understand how it works. Maybe give us a brief introduction to how tape worked, what it did, and what some of the parallels are between things like bias, in this, and I don't know, what are the other, I guess the decks would just be the different formats of tape or the different formulas. But
why don't I explain it like this? Okay, so I'll break it down. Like, so if you're looking at Zulu and you're a guy that's like old KG veteran or some young kid that got your grandpa's tape machine out of storage, if you're looking at Zulu and you're looking at the deck, again, these decks are meant to simulate these sounds. I sat for a very long time with the real tape machines. I didn't sit there and run tones. I actually just would listen to recorded material from an actual tape machine and then take that same material and try to get Zulu to do the same thing until we were getting to the point where we were phasing out each other. We were nulling. And as well, we felt satisfied with the result. But basically, each deck is meant to simulate that type of deck. So you have the Swiss deck, which is meant to sound like the Uders. That's what the deck rhymes with. The Japanese decks, the cassette-based decks. The bias is meant to simulate the effect of screwing with the bias control. I've met many people over the years, including myself, that would actually manipulate the bias on a card on a multi-track machine because they wanted this card to be a little darker and they wanted this one to be really aggressive because they were cutting lead vocals over here on track 5. So I wanted to be able to manipulate the sound of the deck's frequency response and the compression behavior, since bias influences that. Even though in reality, bias is actually at such a high frequency according to the schematics, like it's far beyond the range of hearing, something crazy like 150 kilohertz, right?
Yeah, it makes the sound sticky on the tape.
Right.
More bias sticks more, but you get more distortion too. And it was always like you're playing around with the sweet spot, right?
Right. So I wanted to be able to manipulate that so that it became a musical extension. Instead of it just being a calibration control behind the panel, it was like, well, why don't you just take that control and put that on the face of the box and make it like something that you can interact with. Like, I'm cutting bass now. I don't need all this top end. I want the bottom end to stick out more. I want the subsonics to jut out, right? I want the bump to be exaggerated, or I want it to be neutral, or I want it to be really bright, or I want to, and this is the other thing, I wanted to figure out a way to make it where, I call this the bypass control, but there's decks I've seen people do manipulative things to for the top end that I can't really get into in this interview, but it was almost as if they had made tape absorb transient energy from treble in an even more open sounding way. So that's what the bypass control for bias is on Zulu. There's a way to turn that off. And what it does is it makes it brighter, but then the compression artifact disappears. I've heard that on a few weirdo decks. And I was like, this is kind of cool. Because some people just want the analog thing but they don't want all of it. And so that was like part of like, how do I disconnect these processes from one another if I want to on command, right? So I kind of inserted these little Easter eggs into Zulu to take care of that. You have the enhanced control, which to me reminds me the most of when people are still trying to get more and more and more top end out of tape. So they'd use all these different Dolby processes. They'd yank the highs up. You know, it was like another frequency compression control. And as it turns out, because you're blending two signals together in parallel, you actually get some really cool effects with bass, but also because tape is never 100% dialed out on Zulu, even when you turn enhance all the way up, you kind of get this really great effect of bringing in the top end back, but because it's an analog top end, and now you're like, oh, I only have a little bit of the tape left, the harder you start to hit Zulu, then it impacts both, right? Because enhance and Zulu, in Zulu's tape circuit feed into one another. So you can get really great gain effects that way while still sounding very hi-fi, but sounding very buttery and very rich. Alan is like the one who really taught me the most about what enhanced sounds like when you play with it, which is great. But it really allows you to say, okay, I don't want it to be as affected, but I still want it to sound analog, right? And that was a great circuit that I wish existed in all tape machines, but it doesn't. But this was like more of, okay, now that we have tape as the core technology, we have to do some circuit bending. And so that was like the other part. I got to make this sound like a malfunctioning deck too. So that's what the enhanced control allows. Headroom, again, that's the circuit bending part. A machine with very poor or poorly calibrated headroom, failing op amps, bad power supply, blown caps, you name it. Sometimes that shit sounds cool. So I wanted to be able to give people the chance to break their decks, right? The back of the machine, the formula. Different tape formulas have different saturation points. So like a +3 tape formula versus a +6 versus a +9 or a +12, they all have different operating points where they're happy. And then when you start to get into the point where they're at maximum overload level, which is known as the MOL, they begin to saturate at more than 3% THD. I wanted to give somebody the ability to do that no matter what tape deck you had. So for example, I wanted you to be able to pull up, let's say, my simulation of something that was inspired by, we own a Studer A810 at Handsome Audio, right? And I wanted to be able to see what it sounded like if I put cassette tape on that. Now that's technically impossible, but the closest thing to it. Well, once I perfectly modeled these different tape types, and now I could interchange them in ways that you couldn't physically in the real world, it was like, that's kind of cool putting a cassette tape on a Studer. That sounds really cool. You know, and like it, so now it became like, now you have a myriad of different tones available, right? But if I compare it to a real tape machine, imagine if Zulu was just set to one deck, set to bias, you know, for the correct coloration of your machine. Enhance is set to 0 and headroom is probably set to high or pro. That's your tape machine and that's it. And then whatever tape formula you're using, that's it. You have one setting, okay? But now imagine I take all tape machines, no matter which ones you encounter, and you can kind of get extremely close to all of them. And you can jot those things down as a preset and use them as like your engineer's diary. And you can have any tape machine you want on command. If you visited a studio that was trying to do like M, but anyways, they do a lot of analog tape-based stuff, right? So you've seen these studios that are trying to do I call it bro-fi. It's like retro music that's intentionally retro.
Bro-fi.
I love it, right? But you know what? You probably know a dude that records this.
Hey,
anyways,
man, it's preferable to bro country, in my opinion.
Dude, those people use whatever they can find. And I wanted people to have the chance to do that. I meet so many people that cut folk music and they want to do it in the most distorted, off-the-wall way. Well, if you make a tape simulator that only does the polite wine and cheese Aston Martin version of tape, how are you going to get that? These dudes are cutting on decks that people hate on online forums, right? First of all, fight me, right? When I first read that Gabe was cutting on a 8516 machine, a Japanese 8516 to cut Sharon Jones, who I loved her music. God rest her soulful behind, who I loved. He was cutting her with a Rode vocal microphone, like one of those $200 Rode mics on that deck. I'm like, that deck's got to be magic. I've never heard a Rode sound like that. And like, I don't have anything against Rode. I'm just saying I've never heard a Rode sound like that. The fact they were cutting Amy Winehouse with a Rode. I'm not talking about like a high-end tube Rode mic. I mean like the one you buy at Guitar Center when you get your first mic, the affordable Rode. They were cutting hit making vocals with this on crappy tape machines that they had somehow wizarded their way into sounding gorge. And I'm like, I gotta have that as part of this thing. So many people I've talked to said, dude, that's the sound of tape. These decks that everybody says run from online, it's not because of the way that they sounded per se. Some people are snobs about it, but it's because of the maintenance, right? I'm like, well, what if I could just get like a gold standard version of each of these decks? And while they survive the process, and this happened to us, I get them to be perfect, and then I get Zulu to match that. Dude, like those old school multi-tracks from Japan that I modeled, man, they don't sound like the way they did when I was testing them anymore. And I can't get them to sound like that anymore either. I'm like, what the, I can't even I can't get back to the test reel. You know what I mean? That's wild, it's crazy. I watched these guys online. I bought a so-and-so for $800. Isn't that a steal? And the guy's like, yeah, I got to drop $8,000 to get this 24 track to function. I'm like facepalm, like, oh my God, buy a Zulu or buy something else or don't buy tape. You're in for a long adventure in keeping that machine alive. And I love tape machines. I love the concept of it, but don't do it.
One of the things I like hearing you talk about using the Zulu and being reminded of the way it's set up where you can track through it, is there's all these cool options, but you're not going to get option overload because you can record through this in the recording stage. So once you get a good sound, you're inspired by it, you love it, you play through it, that's the sound that goes down to tape, you're done. You move on to the next thing. It's not like, it's not like having this in a plugin format where you come back later and you're like, man, that sounded great, but what if I try this over, and then tomorrow it's like, well, what if we do this instead? Meanwhile, your production's changing.
I think what this eliminates for a lot of people is guessing, right? A lot of people are scared of committing, okay? And what is kind of cool is that because Zulu's there and you're doing the tape thing, it's like you forget about the whole the fear of commitment. Like, what if I overcompress? Or what if I do this and what if I do that? And it's just like, well, now it sounds like a tape machine, right? And because there is loss, now you want gear that gives you more gain than possible. And on top of that, I don't know necessarily if everybody agrees with this, but gear sounds different on tape and through Zulu than it does by itself into digital. Does that make any sense? Like, it sounds better. So I feel like it encourages people to play around with their stuff more. Like, if you could get it right to tape, you would, right? And because a compressor isn't going to give you the same thing out of Zulu that it would by itself on a snare, you do feel like you're more confident. Excuse me. If you record it to digital and you compress the snare to digital and there's a lot of hi-hat bleed in there, it's really bright. It's difficult to really tame. It's hard to really get rid of highs, right? That's why there's so many products out there that are meant to soothe and tame digititis, right? But one of the working theories I've had for a long time, and this is what makes Zulu to me very different in thinking, is I designed to this aesthetic. I think the most destructive part of the process to any recording session is the actual recording process itself. I think that going into digital converters imparts the most manipulation of the overall sound itself when you're recording into the computer. Now, mind you, everybody hears what their stuff comes like if they're monitoring off their converters and so on and so forth, right? But the issue is that that's a adulterated version of the sound, right? And because you have like the anti-aliasing filtering that goes on, which does crazy things to phase. It does crazy things to the proportions of frequencies. It sometimes makes things harsher. I said, why don't I make a piece of technology that is designed to fight that, so that when you record, you're only hearing things at their best rather than having to imagine them sounding better. You know what I mean? So like, if you have tape in front of your computer, when you cut through, let's say you're doing it in layback, right? Which is where you come off the repro head into the computer. All of the top end beyond a certain point is going to be compressed and saturated and rolled off. The bottom end is going to be fatter, right? And you're kind of harmonically combating the cut that happens in the filtering in the converters, right? So in a way, it's like if you send something that's more harmonically rich than it needs to be into digital conversion, then what comes back out of that sounds normal. Does that make sense? It's like the Pultec trick, right? Like you cut and boost bass at the same time. What if you were boosting harmonics into something that cut harmonics? Like I kind of feel like anti-aliasing filtering, if that's really the issue, I feel like that screws with the harmonic content of your top end and your mids, because it's like a 60 dB cut at 20K because of the Nyquist curve and all that other jazz. Please don't crucify me over this. This is my loose understanding of it, but it just sounds better this way. And on many instances, people tell me it sounds more like what they hear in their head instead of without it. And I think it has a lot to do with just being sensitive to the fact that this is still relevant in our conversation about digital recording, that there has to be more tools that combat that cut and combat that loss of detail. And so this is my way of approaching, is if I make it more harmonically busy and more musical and there's more things happening, then even though there's a cut there, a lot more is preserved than would be if it were not there. Zulu.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I like the theories like that, and it certainly makes sense. I mean, the Nyquist filter, Rockstars, is if you don't have that and your high frequencies extend up beyond 20 kilohertz, then the digital sampling folds it back into the audible range and you get this crazy robotic weirdness and distortion. So that's why it's filtered out. But because it's filtered out, it affects all the frequencies below it anyhow, just in a subtler way. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you are ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you in whichever DAW you are using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to mix in your own studio and even include in your mixing portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind, before we close out here within the next 10 minutes, talk about drums, because I know drums is an important thing for you, and it's one of those things that, is we're quick to recognize the value of analog tape when we're recording rhythm sections, and you already brought it up. So I wanted to ask you if you had any favorite ways you really enjoy recording drums you want to talk about, geek out on some of your techniques, some of the ways that you've blended that and mixed that in with using Zulu to get some great drum sounds, just anything to get the rock stars excited about hitting the studio for tracking their next drum session.
I think the greatest thing an engineer can do is experiment with their overhead placement. One of the things that used to get me some amazing tones for drums was once you learn the basic stuff, so Glenn Johns, XY, Space Pair, Recorder Man, start experimenting with those same theories. So for example, one of the things I love to do is do some very standard stuff for like kick drum, snare, toms, that sort of thing. And then where are the overheads going to live, right? So one of the things I did a long time ago that was great on a hard rock record, which sounded really nuts, was I put the overheads below the cymbals about a foot off the floor, right? Equidistant from kick and snare and on an angle to the kit. So it's like I used it as like there's a broadcast technique that I think is very similar to George Massenburg's, where the overheads are at an angle. Instead of just like you looking at the kit and they're straight across, they're actually like you're treating it where you draw a line down the snare and the kick. So like you make that the dividing point, and then the overheads on the opposite lines of that dividing line. And so what I did is I tried that but then I had them way spaced out and they were like literally a foot off the floor and the floor was carpeted and it was like KM84s. And it sounded nuts. And it was like almost as if the sound of the floor became the overheads, and it totally changed the way I mixed overheads in that record. And then I began to become more experimentative. I had it where overheads were equidistant from kick and snare over the kit, but they were facing each other. So they were basically like looking at each other over the cymbals. Mm-hmm. And that was an amazing sound. I had the same thing where the overheads were looking out away from the kit. And so the drummer's in the center. Like there's stuff like that that really changes the sound of your records. And it's not something that you have to do just for like jazz. Everybody thinks these weird techniques for recording drums are for jazz. They sound amazing on rock. And I know that a lot of younger engineers and veteran engineers are really quick to get into triggering and all of that. But what really geeks me out is great sounding recorded drums without triggers, without cheats, without special fancy schmancy software to make things bleed out. Let me tell you a trick, especially for people that do a lot of produced records where they're producing records and not just recording bands. Like, don't throw that term produce around too loosely. If you're just recording them and you're not really twisting their perspective on what the record is supposed to sound like, don't call yourself quite the producer. Engineer that, make your money. But like, look at how many great records, Lidge, that are featuring cymbals that weren't even recorded at the same time as the drummer played. Right? Like that type of shit. I'm like, man, how cool is that you could go into a session, okay, and say, you know what, don't play any rides. You can play the hi-hat, you can play that one crash, but you can't play rides, and then you got to overdub them later, right? And the reason why I say that is even the greatest drummers that we look up to and we say, you know what, that's the seminal sound. You know, if everybody listening, if anybody like Steely Dan, Asia, the fact that Gadd, okay, that Steve Gadd is talking about overdubbing hi-hats. That's Steve Gadd.
Yeah.
And he's overdubbing hi-hats. If that dude, who's like the drum god of pocket, right? Like black, white, Steve Gadd is a bad mamma jamma on pocket. And somebody still said, hey, Steve, you got to overdub your hi-hats. Okay. If you can say okay to that, then you can overdub stuff. You can put stuff in later. I've had drummers have so much fun overdubbing toms because they can play fills that are impossible. That, you know, and like, but it really wakes up your creative lens a little better. You know what I'm saying? So like for drums, yeah, you can do a traditional thing, but like get great at recording just drums. Don't worry about triggers. Don't worry about this collection or that instrument tool, or get great at the raw sound. And also, if you are taking in clients in your studio, invest in a kit. Like buy a real drum kit. Buy a kit you would like to play, even if you don't know how to play the drums. Go on Craigslist. Help some old guy that's retiring from playing the bar weekend warrior gig. No, seriously. Get like a good Pearl kit, a Ludwig, like a DW. You'd be shocked at what people are getting rid of because they're retiring. A lot of times these people just want to talk to somebody young and hear what kids are doing nowadays. You'd be shocked. Again, the power of conversation, the power of connecting with people. There are people with gorgeous drum kits in storage. They're never going to play them again. And they just want somebody that's going to use them to good. Or there's a dude on YouTube that I follow. He takes old drum kits that are cheap and he redoes them. And man, you'd be shocked at what a cheap kit with good heads sounds like recorded, especially in the hands of a skilled player. That brings in business when you have a good kit in your studio and good cymbals. Go cymbal shopping. You don't got to spend $1 million on cymbals. Talk to drummers. What'd you get? That's an Avedis ride? Oh, snap. They got one on Craigslist for 50. Some dude went blind. I don't know, right? Like, get good stuff for drums. You'd be surprised. Drums make records. Okay, they make the record beyond a doubt. And the better sounding the kit is in your room, the less you have to work on it. It's true, man.
You mentioned something earlier on, and I love these tips. You mentioned something earlier on about like kind of a crappy or distorted mic, something that's kind of messed up, blended in with more of the hi-fi stuff. Can you dig into that a little bit more?
Oh, man. There's these mics called tape recorder mics, right? Gabriel Roth talked about him. Todd's talked to me about him. My partner, Tod Levine. What up, Todd? At Handsome Audio. He also owns a studio in Saugerties, New York called Magnetic North. You could take these mics, and if you own a soldering iron, you can get rid of the stupid dead connector that no longer goes to anything off the end of it and put a regular XLR cable on it. You might have to mess around with it a little bit to get it to work, but like, man, these mics have like no headroom on modern recording levels. So like, but in parallel to like the real kit, they sound way better than any plugin. Sometimes they just sound great as they are without anything in parallel. And they really give things great character. So there's the oddball mic things. I mean, spend like $5 on a mic. There's companies like Turner, Lafayette, old Shure mics are like that. Sometimes you'll find stuff
from tape machine.
Yeah, man.
Stuff like that.
Those walkie-talkie mics. There's a kid on eBay that sells telephones as microphones, and they sound sick on drums, man. Another one that's good is, Todd taught me this trick, and I kind of went and took it to the next level. But he used to do stuff where he'd put mics inside cardboard boxes and then record drums with them, right? And you can do that with wooden boxes too. But what I used to do, which is really cool, that I learned about learning about Jacklin discs, is the whole thing where you put the divider between the two mics to kind of isolate them a little better, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I started doing was, and I believe I saw this done on a YouTube video. There's is it Creative Sound Labs? I forget the name. It's the cat.
Yeah, Ryan Earnhardt.
Right, Ryan,
yeah,
right? Yeah. Cool guy. Does great stuff. Him and Mixer Man on that channel. And what I used to do is actually like take different materials and put it right in front of the drum kit and then put the mic on the other side of the material and screw with the resonance of the material and how the mic picked that up. Mm-hmm. Again, the other thing, oh my God, I made this is really cool. If you guys are really into drums and you want them to sound super isolated, the dude who was like the god of getting isolated drum sounds was Bruce Sweetian. He's still a bad man. Right. I'm not talking about him like he's gone. I'm just saying Bruce used to invent stuff to record drums with. So like for Billie Jean, he had a thing that was a blanket that had a zipper and a drawstring that went over the head of a kick drum. And I believe they take the front head off and they had a zipper that you could slide the mic in through and then close shut. And then you get the boop, 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 boop out of the kick drum, but there'd be no bleed. And you could like crank on that mic and get like next to nothing, just like a really solid drum machine-ish, which is like kind of cool for metal because it's more batter head than it is reso head. But the thing that's really nuts is that the blanket itself has a resonance. Like I used to sit outside of I'd stand in front of the kit and have somebody play and the blanket vibrates too. And it makes like a boom, boom, boom like that. I'm like, whoa, a moving blanket vibrates, right? And then Bruce also has a shield he made. And I kind of did this with chimney wrap, right? There's a thing called chimney wrap. It's like copper, but it's like a really wide reel of tape, but it's made of like really heavy clad copper and you can bend it. And I would take that and cut it into a shape to fit underneath the bottom hat on a hi-hat stand and put a notch in it so you could slide it over and then put like a clamp underneath it so it would hold it in place. But I take that metal, that bendy metal material and then put like fiberglass on top of it and fiberglass on the bottom and then wrap it in burlap, right? And then slide that underneath the hi-hat. And it was like a big giant plate that if you did it right was out of the way of the drummer's path when they played. And then what you get is you get this giant shield for the snare mic, and it would block so much bleed from the hi-hat. You know how 57s are underneath the hi-hat, and you're trying to get that snare? Well, this shield, because it was out of the drummer's way, or if you just had a dude that was like, cool enough to play around it, or some cats have the really high hi-hat stand, which I love, but sometimes they have them low, so you got to work around that. But anyways, you could get like a lot of bleed you get rid of a lot of bleed by doing that. And you'd get that like, okay, this is almost like listening to a sample. And then you could gate out the rest, but the hi-hat was so minimized, right? Bruce had all these techniques for that. And so when I look at drums now, I'm not like, so many people just like rush to get into triggering. I'm like, you don't even know your room.
you don't even know the problem is triggering is like, it's kind of a limited palette of sound possibilities. And what you've already got in your room is like a ton of possibilities if you know how to use it right,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty cool. But also tell us about the drumbrella, because I love hearing about that. And, we don't get to hear about that very often. So, some people are scratching their head and like, what the hell is a drumbrella?
All right, so drumbrella is something that was at Ocean Way Studios and many other places. Somebody that I admire a lot is Eric Valentine, and he actually has one at his place. Among many other things, like his amazing line of equipment. He's behind Barefoot. He does Undertow audio, all these amazing contributions to music technology. But the one thing at Eric's studio that sticks out to me is his drumbrella, and it's on this automated winch. So basically, it's like, imagine an umbrella, made out of wood and filled with soundproofing that's hanging from the ceiling over your drum kit, and you can manipulate the height of it so that it changes the ceiling height over the drummer. And because it's layered with soundproofing material, so like, Owens Corning 703 or Roxel, right? Mineral wool or just regular good old fashioned fiberglass. If you have to use more of it if you use like Pink Panther. But either way, if it's got all that over the drum kit, when you lower it, so like, let's say you got a room with a really high ceiling. Well, you can lower the drumbrella, right, to 7 feet. That sounds really different than 8. It sounds different than 10 and so on. And what ends up happening is like the bass response of your drum kit and the way the overheads react with the rest of the kit, like a drum kit resonates against itself when you play. So
in the room or against the walls.
Yeah. So when you play with the drumbrella, oh my God. Now, mind you, mine was different. I didn't have a winch like Eric. I wasn't sophisticated because I couldn't find a winch that was going to attach to our ceiling because we had iron beams. And before we moved out of that studio, I didn't complete that, but we did have one that was suspended by really heavy chain, right? Now, here's the deal. I almost died making my drumbrella, because the contractor went home for the day and I really wanted to get it up. So that's a dirty joke waiting to happen. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to get this thing attached to the final set of chains so it would be fully suspended. So I looked up a very old and dangerous technique that old contractors know about called a dead man, which is where you use like a 2x4 to act as another person to hold up something for you. So I kind of used like a 2x4 and a ladder, and this drumbrella was really heavy. It was like 150 to 200 pounds. It was really heavy. And it had like 1,500 pound rated chain hanging from the ceiling into bolts, which, I mean, it was strong enough to hold it, but it was just heavier than a what to get it up there, because you're trying to lift it from below. Well, now I'm on a ladder trying to dead man it and hold it up at the same time, and then attach the chain, which had like the eye bolts on there so you could screw it in, the eyelets. Lord. So I finally got the thing to suspend. Once I did one chain, I did the third, all 4 sides, and it was amazing. It was like every person that came to track in my studio was like, holy shit, what is that? Am I going to die? I'm like, if you do, it'll be the best session ever. Like, and that was the joke.
Sound
for like
great
a year.
when you do.
It'll sound great when you die. They're gonna play this at your wake, man. They're gonna, right? He died playing. He died doing what he loves, right?
Good Lord.
But drumbrella changed the dynamic of my room because my room was so vast. It was like 900 square feet. So what I could do is put a drummer under there, right? Or I could put the drummer somewhere else, and then if I did an ensemble recording session, I could put the vocalist under drumbrella and enclose them with like gobos or curtains. I had a lot of theater drapes and stuff, and it worked. I'm like, holy smack, like this is dope. And I remember cutting. Now here was like the moment when it was like all came home for me. Those D190Es that I had a pair of, I had them in Glenn Johns on a drummer's kit, and they were doing like a really kind of weird, almost like early Pink Floyd influence thing, like early Brit, borderline prog type stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And so I threw those mics up in a pair, Glenn Johns pair. I had like a mic, I had a condenser on a floor tom, couple of mics on snare, tom, regular bog standard stuff elsewise, right? The kit itself is really, on the records I have, just the Glenn Johns pair and a little bit of everything else. Holy moly. It was like, this sounds just like a Beatles record. This is crazy.
That's
and it's
wild.
2015. I'm like, no way. Am I getting this sound? It was the drumbrella and those 2 mics together, man. I'm like, so this is what, but then when you look at recording the Beatles and you look at the space that, like, another one that like was a really seminal sound for me for early Brit stuff was Black Sabbath. I love the way the drums sound. A lot of people like, I'm like, I like those drums a lot.
On Paranoid.
Yes.
That record, those drums are that is the most crankable Black Sabbath record in my book.
And I don't care if they aired the cymbals because that was so common back then. It kind of sounds like it a little bit, but just the kick and snare sound on that record, and then plus the way dude is like, because this is my theory too. All those British drummers were really jazz cats, so like the swing. Oh man, the swing on that record, and like that's the thing too. For you youngins out there, space influences groove. So like when you listen to drummers playing, they will sound different based on the space that they're in. And that actually impacts pocket and groove for the listener. So like when you're listening to Sabbath and the dude's basically in like an office booth in a cubicle cutting those drums. I mean, like if you saw the place they cut, the walls were lined with those ceiling tiles, those asbestos tiles. They were on the wall. And it's just like, like the way like everything sounds on War Pigs is just like, it's just like, like everybody likes Zeppelin. I'm like, but have you listened to Sabbath? Like, that's stupid. Like the stuff they do with such a limit. I mean, that's a tiny, itty bitty space. And it's just like, man, like I haven't heard triggers that sound like that.
No, not at all. So, and I remember hearing stories that they would like do tricks like tape a quarter to the inside of the kick drum beater head. And that's how you get the extra attack.
I don't care what they taped inside it. I mean, oh my God, man. Like, I used to be like that dude that would listen to old records and just like wonder and wonder and wonder, just like Steely Dan. When I got into them, I'm like, and it was like after Roger Nichols passed away. And like, I remember Roger Nichols wrote a great article about the Rane MS-1B, which is why I own one. And I've always owned one. He had great advice, right? But I never could figure out, some people have told me it was Wendell, like maybe they were using the drum machine, the drum thing back then. I know people that own them now. But either way, like there's just drum sounds you chase your whole career. And so for me, I chase sounds like that more than anything, just because it's a bucket list thing for me, and then there's people that like, I just really admire their drum sounds. Like one of them is Joel Hamilton, who's also a Zulu user. Like I love the stuff he gets. Cause like when you go to Studio G and you see his spaces, you're like, nah, like this is not the drum sound because it just looks too good. Like the spaces are so vast and cavernous and gorge and beautiful, right? But Joel is a frequency bender. He is a tone bender. He's like a dude that just knows his equipment inside and out. And Joel will have like one EQ to do that one frequency. And when he does it, you're like, oh shit, that's the sound from the Lettuce record. Like that's him. But when you look at the spaces he cuts in, it's like, huh? Like this room is like too big. But like he just knows his shit. He knows his space. He knows his room. He knows how to make those things fill the void, and also how to eliminate the sense of space in ways that a lot of us don't come to terms with. And it's because of his lineage, his learning, his curve, his genius. But I could talk about Joel Hamilton all day and how much I love his work and how much I love him as a human being. But those sounds on Paranoid, like that's why when people tell me I'm just using triggers, I'm like, boo! like no, get good at the basic stuff. And like, here's my thing too. If you want to get good at recording drums and you don't have an out, do some live sound. Get rid of all the tools you got and go do a show with a digital console. Or if you're even in better shape than I am half the time, you'll get a real Allen and Heath console, or you get a working Soundcraft or something like that, or a Midas, like a non-digital Midas, an analog Midas, where you have nothing but some 57s. Maybe you get an SM81 for an overhead or a hi-hat mic, and all you got is those sounds. Learn to dial in real drums, because that's the humbling, eye-opening, third eye kind of thing you need to have happen as a drum recording person. There's people that are great at everything except drums, and it doesn't have to be that way. I used to be that dude that was scared of cutting drums because drums is such a big, important piece of records. But once I learned how to, once my uncle once showed me something that I show engineers for the first time, and they're old men. Okay. He's like, yo, motherfucker, you know that kick drums are on stands that swivel for a reason, right? He used to say shit like that to me. My uncle was like mean in a way that reached you, but at the same time, he wasn't trying to be mean on purpose, but this is how he talked. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you don't have to aim the mic at the thing you want to record directly. And he's talking about inside the kick. He's like, spin it around until it sounds best. No kick drum is the same. And sometimes it would suck the regular way. And sometimes it would sound fantastic the wrong way. Like he'd be like, okay, aim between the shell and the batter head and see if it's different. He'd be like, oh, that sounds good. And then I'm always an experimenter, right? So I remember I used to do like, I'd do stuff like that until it sounded good. I'd isolate that mic and be like, okay, that sounds cool. And then I remember one day I found a technique, this is like many, many years later, but I called him up about it, where I figured out a way to do out kick mic where it rejected the rest of the kit. And it was based on physics, right? And it was where a mic stand had not been tightened properly and the kick mic kind of like, or you know, like how the brake slowly gives. So the out kick mic was supposed to be aimed right at the kick drum head, out the reso head. And it started to arc down slowly during the session. It was like a disco session, right? And eventually I'm like coming out like, yo, it was a great take, man. It was like take 10, right? And it was like a swinging disco Philly record, right? And the mic, I'm like, he's like, what did you do to the mic, man? It changed. He's like, did you adjust the setting? I'm like, no. He's like, well, in the beginning of the session, it sounded different. And now it sounds great. Man, you're a great engineer. I'm like, really? And I'm like looking, he's like taking a pee, you know, he's going to the bathroom or whatever. And I'm looking at the kit. And I'm like, I don't get it. And I finally looked at it and I'm looking at the front of the mic. The front of the drum kit. And the mic had arced down and it was aimed at where the shell meets the head on the bottom of the kick drum.
So it was like outside on the resonator head.
Yeah, it was aimed at like basically the floor right in front of the kick drum from like 2 inches up. So it was getting the bass collection at the bottom of the kick drum off the hardwood floor, but still getting a piece of the head vibrating and the shell. And that's when I began to really revisit all drums. Like, wait a minute, how do shells sound versus heads, right? Not like when you strike them, but when they vibrate. Like that was when it was like, okay, I got to start experimenting more with drums. You know, some people mic the side of a snare drum and all that. That's cool. But I'm talking about like really getting into like, not only do drums resonate, they resonate the air around them. So that's when I really started developing these other techniques. Like how do you mic overheads? How do you mic drums? You know, I see stuff I steal every once in a while. Like I see the Gabriel Roth will find the place between snare, kick, and hi-hat that's equidistant below the first rack tom and put a dynamic there. And sometimes that's the whole kit sound. And a little, you know what I mean? And it's like, and then you got like Homer Steinweiss on drums. So it's like, okay, like this is stupid, but like, you know what I mean? But like that kind of stuff.
But you just got to experiment. It's like,
yeah,
you know,
like don't be scared, man. Like don't watch these videos and be like, that's the way. It's like, no, like
that's just one of the ways. We need a toolkit. We need a palette with many, many, many colors in it. And all these different techniques or different colors you have. And you learn how to paint with all these and you learn how to pick and choose the ones you want to use for that sound, or you just stumble on stuff too. And you talked about it kind of in the beginning of the podcast. You're talking about, it's not about the gear and it's not about like fancy gear in studios. And I started thinking about it. I was like, you know, or it's about the way that you get to know your gear and use it all in combinations. And it occurred to me that really no two studios with engineers are ever the same, because every studio you go to, like somebody's figured out a cool combo of this mic that they got in that gear in this room with this bass and this drum and this guitar amp. And that's the sound that's so cool that you get a chance to show somebody and inspire a musician on a session, you know? Which is pretty cool. But we have been going for a good long time and this is awesome. So I'm afraid, I hate to say it, but we probably got to wrap up. And I have one more question I want to ask you before we go. And then I'm going to rewind all this and listen to it all over again because there's so much awesome stuff in here. But this one is hypothetical. We want to take the Wayback Studio machine. You're going to go back and find young Langston, you know, who's just about to walk into your uncle's studio. Catch yourself on the street. You know, I don't know if you're showing up with the Kangol hat now or if young Langston had the Kangol hat on then, but you're going to say, listen, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know if you want to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself?
Well, that is a fantastic question. If you can just give me a moment to ponder it.
Yeah. The advice is more silence, young Langston.
I think the thing I would probably tell my younger self to do more than anything in hindsight is get into technology sooner.
Mm-hmm.
I think that while it is fantastic that I entered the audio tech industry after doing the music industry thing for so long, I feel like if I had done this sort of work at a younger age, I'd be even more advanced than I am now, right? Like, so, and maybe not, but just in terms of worry less about yourself and worry more about how you can help others with your gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Because I spent a lot of time in the music industry using that as a way to kind of further myself as an artist, in addition to producing others and working for others as an engineer and so on and so forth. But I kind of learned along the way that my gifts truly were not about me. They were about other people. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's the other piece too, is that like focus on others, let the calling that you have be to give others gifts. Like I have a friend who told me, because I used to say, damn, man, like I thought I was going to be like the next thing. And this guy's another industry guy, another insider, another way, way up the ladder compared to me in terms of engineering and production. And he said, well, the reason why you feel that way is because of your perspective, And he said it like this: you just wanted to make music, right, that people listen to and dug, and somehow that would benefit you and the listener, right? He said, but really what's been put into the universe for you is that you made something that changes the way all people can make music.
Yeah.
And he said, that's the power of the position you have, is that you have been able to bless all musicians and all songwriters with your gifts versus I'm good as a rapper or a singer or a songwriter. Look at me, which could in some sense be a great long-lived career, but it's finite. Versus you've changed the conversation and you've changed the entire dialect of what the recording tech industry is. Like I try not to harp on this, but I'm reminded of it a lot. My mother talks to me about it a lot. Other people, my business consultant who used to work for some of the greatest companies in the music industry for equipment. And he's just like, he says, it's unfortunate that it's taken this long, but at the same time, even though it's overdue, it's the right time because it's right now that like somebody that looks like you is doing things at your level. Because maybe we've exhausted the conversation and that's why equipment has kind of come to this like wall, where we keep just making the same old school mic preamp. We keep just making the same old school compressor, the same mics. He said, what if the whole time the reason why this conversation kind of got stagnant is because it was only getting the input of a few select people? So my business consultant, who's not Black, just said, like, we've always had this thing in America where we all contribute to stuff, right? In some way, shape, or form. Well, the tech industry is kind of like one of those places where in music, it hasn't been that for a long, long time, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm trying to bring into this is not just necessarily what I can do, but also to invite other people from different communities in. You know what I'm saying? Like get like people from Mississippi, like, and you'd be shocked. Like I've had so many people approach me that want to do tech startups that are African-American or they're biracial or they're Latino, because like that's part of my lineage too, that have not seen themselves in the industry in that role. And they have amazing ideas. I'm like, oh my God, like this would be so cool, but it doesn't exist currently. Like, I mean, they have the idea, they have the concept, but they don't have the conduit. So now they're coming to me like, how can you help me do that? Right? And how can you help me get introduced into that process? How do I begin thinking in this way? And I'm like, wow. So like for me, even though there's like the racial thing and all that, I'm like, just look at it from the perspective of a musician, right? Because music is a unifying force in the universe, right? It's like, wow, what if like there's a whole nother series of volumes in music technology, recording technique, listening formats, all of that, but it's been in different communities that we never tapped in America and around the world. And now this new age of that is emergent. You know what I'm saying? So like, that's what excites me. It's not about white people or black people. It's just like, dude, I've opened the door and these people are coming to me with stuff like for example, okay, I'll put it to you like this. This is how bugged out I am about the stuff people are telling me. I do a lot of research on inventors of color in American history because I teach a lot of children of color about science, right? As another job that I have. I have a STEM company with my partner, and she and I, we teach kids on the weekends of all different ethnicities about the American history of inventors, and they do a lot of STEM projects. That's like a big thing in education now, right? And so one of the people we talked about is Lonnie Johnson. And it's more about dispelling rumors because a lot of people talk about Lonnie Johnson as the inventor of the Super Soaker, but he was like a NASA scientist. So he didn't just invent the Super Soaker. It was really for a fluid power distribution system. And it happened to be the pump that made a stream of water that was really fun, right? So like I'm doing like a research on Lonnie and I'm watching interviews of him currently. And so I'll put it to you like this. It's like this same landscape changing revelation that I'm hearing time to time in audio from people from different communities, right? Especially black and brown communities and black and brown spaces. So like I'm looking up Lonnie Johnson. You know what his current project is? How to convert body heat into electricity to charge batteries, like the Matrix, like actual real life Matrix stuff. But like basically he's, because it's about conservationism. It's about what if you could make it where, I think he was inspired by the movie, but I'm like, the fact that you have the brain power to make science fiction factual or possible is amazing. Yeah. He's like, what if you could? Like we spend 8 hours a day asleep. Well, and most people get hot when they sleep. So he's like, what if your mattress could absorb that heat energy and convert it into electricity, probably through some induction process, right? Some capacitive induction process, and store it as a battery and help offset your energy costs for your home. Like that type of stuff is like amazing to me on consumerist and environmental and industrial applications. But like my point is that I'm hearing stuff like that, but for audio from people that look like me now.
That's cool, man. That's
and I'm
cool.
like, that's nuts. And like, that's exciting for all people in the music industry. And it's like, it's about damn time that we begin to get new energy and new blood, because I'm sorry, we don't need 1,000 mic preamps that all sound like Neves anymore. We need new stuff. We need new cool shit. We need mics that if you hit a button on them, right? Like you see, like there's the mic modeling systems and all of that. We need a mic that actually does physical modeling inside the head amp. We need, you know what I mean? Like I think of all the great additions to technology that happen that are so sensible that you see periodically, but like we need to keep ushering that new renaissance. Like there's a company called Treehouse Audio, right? I used to do a lot of live sound in addition to studio gigs. I saw a drum. Have you ever seen this? There's like a drum set that nests inside itself for touring musicians. Have you ever seen that?
No, but I'm thinking of a cocktail kit, is the closest thing.
Oh, no. I'm talking about like the floor tom fits and the kick drum. the neck tom fits and that, right? And it has a hatch. So it pops open like Russian nesting dolls, right? Some company invented this called Treehouse Audio, and I saw it for the first time because there's like a guy, it's like a 2-man act. It's the drummer and the guitar player, and the guitar player plays guitar, and then he goes to an octave or pedal to give you bass out of an Ampeg cabinet, right? And the drummer and him travel the country in a Civic. And I'm like, how do you put a drum kit in a Civic? And it's a coupe. He's like, oh, look at my kit. And he's like, look at my kit, right? So he just pops the hatch and the thing pops open like a hat box.
That's hilarious.
And the drums come out. I'm like, this is the type of stuff that we need more and more and more in our modern world. How to shrink the studio down, how to introduce new thought processes into making more musical experiences happen. And yes, new listening formats, new ways to get musicians paid for their content. All of these sorts of things are stuff that we need to be talking about. And I'm glad that different types of people are talking about it, because that makes everybody better. And that's what Zulu is for me.
Langston, I want to thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. This has been awesome. And on that note, how can the Rockstars find you online, follow you? How can they reach out to you with these brilliant ideas and start connecting and collaborating?
My Instagram handle is @Illacov. That's ILLACOV. My Twitter handle is @FriendGeneer. So that's the word friend and then GINEER. So Friendgeneer, because I'm a friend to everyone, right? You can also find me on Gearsluts. My handle on there is Illacov, ILLACOV. My email is Langston, that's LANGSTON, handsomeaudio.com. And my website is handsomeaudio.com. And my Facebook page is handsomeaudio.com. There's also a group on there for people that want to talk about handsome audio equipment called Handsome Audio Analog Renaissance. So you can find that on Facebook as well. And my education company, if you're into that too, some of you folks out there that teach as well as make music or record musicians, is called eSteam. It's ESTEAM. It's a STEAM company that actually teaches STEM principles, but we also do social emotional learning. That's what the extra E is for. And so that's eSteamNYC.com. And you can learn more on Handsome Audio, of course, for the audio stuff about Zulu, Zulu R, which is the rack mount version of Zulu, which is coming out soon, along with Juju, which is our tri-path discrete bus processor, which takes 3 signals and merges them together. So it's like a parallel EQ with another parallel EQ with saturation. And you can actually turn up and down the amount of drive versus the other 2 signals, and vice versa, and vice versa. And it uses all discrete stuff. It uses old school discrete op amps, kind of in the spirit of like the old ones used in like the classic API pre's and everything, but they're not API op amps. They're very different. Along with passive equalization, germanium simulating saturation circuits, American transformers. We actually have a version of these coming out with Jensen input transformers, very high value, high nickel input transformers, and Ultron output transformers. Very high-endy stuff. So again, check out our website and look into our products. Let us know if you're interested. And again, my email is langston@handsomeaudio.com. And Lidge, it's been an absolute pleasure. I want you to push the applause button because you've been a great host. And it has been awesome talking to you. And if anything, I hope that the next time we talk, you'll do more talking than I do, because I hate to hear myself talk. I know that sounds crazy, but I do, because I always feel like I talk too much.
This was your time, man. This was your time. And we're thrilled to hear all the stuff you shared.
But thank you for listening to me and giving me another format to join. And again, keep doing what you do, man. Again, I want you to understand that at least in my book, you're a hero because you're a journalist, right? And these days and times, we live in the age of spin and fake news and all this other stuff. And like, people need to know what's up. And so I feel like the best way you can do it is go to the source. And especially for real musicians and recording personalities, like, these are invaluable gems that you get from these people. Like, I don't care if you listen to me, but like when I listen to people like Andy Sheps get interviewed, or Chad Blake, or if you get to talk to people like Donald Fagen, there's going to be a time when these people aren't around anymore. And so like, it's up to guys like you to give people the real scoop and to get opinions and updates and testimonials and insight into these folks' lives, because that helps inspire and inform the next generation. So what you're doing is very, very important. And so again, my hat's off to you, and I hope that you continue to do this for a very, very long time.
Thank
you,
you
also
man.
have an awesome beard. I wanted to let you know you have a great beard.
It's gotten trimmed a little bit, so it may or may not look like the last photo you saw. But I really enjoy this. And, ever since the very first recordings I did, throwing a studio in the back of a car with my friend Chris King and traveling around the country and just archiving people's stories and music, I knew that just archiving and capturing all these important stories about people and creative arts was really important to me. And so this is a really fun way to be able to do this now. And it's fun to connect with people all over the world. And hearing you talk about people inventing new stuff, I'm sparking ideas of all the different styles of music and different understandings of music that happen all around the world. People who are listening to this podcast right now from anywhere, they're going to bring a completely different take on the understanding of music, hopefully. Hopefully we don't become homogenized through popular music too quickly, because I'm excited to see what, somebody who's putting, metal strings on a gourd with a animal skin head on it somewhere else in the world is bringing to an understanding of what kind of processing and should happen in recordings. But thank you for joining us, man. It's an absolute pleasure. Can't wait to meet you in person. Hearing you talk about being in upstate New York and knowing that Alan is in Western Mass, I'm realizing that you guys might be not too distant of a drive from each other. How far away are you from Alan Evans' place?
Well, my studio is in upstate New York, but actually I live in Westchester County. now. So I'm actually, I think like 3 or 4 hours from Massachusetts, as far as the crow flies, by car, by plane, obviously a lot shorter. But Alan and I have got like a lot of long overdue discussions to have. In particular, one of them does relate to podcasting, because he and I both have a lot of mutual interests and desires to see certain conversations happen from our perspective that I think is actually very richly unique. And also, we are both very fun-loving cats when it comes to culture and art. So we've talked about a few things. I can't really spill too many more beans on it, but we are talking about working together in that way. And also, too, we both really like each other's music. So I just want to catch up with him. We usually see each other when he comes down to Brooklyn. And I believe they're going to be doing Bowl Live soon. So I'm definitely going to hang with him and his brother. We're all very close. So, again, this is the beauty of being like an old head, man, is that like, I like to travel and get in touch and connect with people and stay in touch with them. Like that's how you grow your family base. Right. So
indeed.
that's what's valuable to me.
Well, I'm going to bid you good evening, and thank you for being on the show here. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. I may give you a shout when I get close to Brooklyn and your neck of the woods. See if I can say hello.
You got my number. Hit me up when you want to.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Langston. Can't wait to meet you in person and see you in the studio, dude.
Take care, bro. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. Also, remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with these weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free mixing course at mixmasterbundle.com. Look for the link in the show notes. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio, all totally free. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.